In this lecture, we'll be getting an introduction to the art and architecture of the ancient Near East. And this is particularly important because this is the place where we break from a purely pictorial record of civilizations to the written record. In other words, with the advent of writing, we have a little bit more information about the civilizations that we're studying. Not a lot more, because the early forms of writing are still sometimes a mystery, and they aren't very comprehensive. But we have some combination now of the pictorial with the written. And the place where that really starts is ancient Mesopotamia and Persia. So up until now, we've been looking at the Stone Age. And even in the Neolithic period, and we ended last module with looking at the Upper Paleolithic and the Neolithic era, in which in the Neolithic era we have places like Stonehenge in England, where the buildings began at about 3000 BCE, or the Menhir alignments, another monument of megalithic structures that began in about 40 to 50 BCE. These were places that, if you remember, must have taken a lot of organization from some kind of higher authority. The sheer magnitude of the undertaking implies that there was an authority that was either religious or political that motivated people to create works like this, which meant that agriculture needed to have been firmly established, because you don't do this kind of project if all of your efforts are still concentrated on your basic survival, your everyday survival, getting food just in your mouth for that day. You have to have a surplus, and you have to have some kind of static, stable civilization. And this happens in Europe at about 5000 BCE. But in a place called the Fertile Crescent, this happens much earlier. And so in Europe, farming is a little bit behind this. If we go back 4,000 years further south and east, we see in this region, a region that people have called the Fertile Crescent, because climate-wise, it was very conducive and hospitable to agriculture. In this area, we see agriculture thrive, and therefore civilizations thrive well before they did in the sites that we've already looked at from the Neolithic era in Europe. And this stretches from this area called Mesopotamia. And the word Mesopotamia means essentially in Greek, between the rivers. It's this area between the Tigris and the Euphrates. And it stretches all along between these two rivers around to this eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And you'll see from this map that they were quite successful with very diverse crops. We see barley, lentils, wheat, but then we also see the domestication of animals and herds that were raised throughout this region. It was here that people stopped wandering, and they started to create controlled urban environments, which meant a more regulated and dependable existence. Remember, once agriculture is firmly established, we have people move on to other roles than farming and herding. We have people that can turn their attentions to civilization, to making objects and later on writing things down. The archaeological excavations in this area uncovers gold objects, jewelry, and artwork. And the first excavations in the 19th century by English and French archaeologists were really concentrating on trying to discover the places that were mentioned in the Bible. So this is early archaeology, and this is, of course, where they were looking, in a place that we could call the Near East. They knew these places were there, and they were really looking for the evidence of these cities that were mentioned in the Bible. But from their discoveries, we can start to piece together the beginnings of a great civilization that would make major contributions to later civilizations. One reason why this is so very important is that we see the birth of writing occur in ancient Sumer, which is one of the earliest cultures that we're going to be looking at. We also see the first city-states, city planning, and organized religion that are also attributed to Sumer, this early civilization. And why is this interesting to us? We will see how these advancements affect the art and the architecture that we see in this region. So we can look to the first towns and settlements in this area. And I'm going to be looking first at Jericho and then Çatalhöyük in Turkey. These are really the first cities in a way. They're smaller than cities, but they were settlements in which we see more than just a few clans pulling together to create something. It is a place where we have thousands of people, and that's quite a large urban settlement. Thousands of people that are all living together under some kind of city organization. This is a bird's eye view of the excavations in Jericho and the surrounding area. And we're really looking at this area right here, where we see some walls, some crevices. All of this is modern stuff, and this is, of course, modern fields. But these excavations show us that there was an organized settlement there. And the building materials were mostly made of mud brick and stone. And archaeological excavations have found that there were remains buried under the floors of houses, which indicates that there were ancestor cults. There were people that were interested in burying and remembering their relatives. This is still Neolithic in this around that Neolithic revolution in 7000 BCE, but it becomes increasingly complex. We see not just little stone houses like in Skara Brae, but rather complex clusters of houses. This gives you a better idea of what some of these wall structures might have looked like in Jericho. And again, if you look very closely, you can see kind of the remnants of mud bricks. This was a region that had no stone, and it was difficult to find building materials. So most of the structures were made out of mud bricks by essentially making a clay brick, a clay rectangle with a mold, allowing it to dry in the sun. And when it was solid, it would be used essentially as a brick. You can imagine that this did not hold up very well to the elements. It was fine when it was dry, but it would melt in the rain. So this is why we see very few existing buildings. Here is another view of some of the walls and that are left in Jericho, and we see that that actually there was quite a bit of height that could be achieved through piling these mud bricks. Çatalhöyük in Turkey begins around 6000 BCE, so it's slightly later. We see similar burials in Çatalhöyük of remains underneath the floors. And those date from about 6500 BCE to 5500 BCE. This is the largest site that has been found so far in the ancient Near East. And it shows, just by the sheer size of this settlement, that agriculture and trade were very well established. This is an excavation site in which we can see again some of these mud bricks. These are actually sandbags. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at these kind of squares of mud brick that have been revealed, and kind of courses that show walls that go down rather deep. And when I say go down, you'll see that actually the living in these settlements happened kind of underground, and the outside organization and activity happened on the roofs. This is a reconstruction of what the village of Çatalhöyük might have looked like. People would have moved within this village, not on streets or even in alleyways, but rather from house to house on the roofs. It was very hot, and you could keep cool by staying below in these mud brick houses. And then if it got very hot, you could get relief by coming out onto the roofs. And then if you wanted to visit your neighbor, you would jump from roof to roof to roof to roof. But there weren't streets that allowed you to navigate through this town. Scholars believe that people moved through this town with ladders and jumped into these little courtyards using ladders and windows. I've included a link to a video three-dimensional reconstruction, sort of a flyover of what this town might have looked like. And you can see that it was really very sophisticated and could accommodate quite a few people. Little is known about the religion, but there were many rooms that were found with decorations, which scholars believe might have been shrines.